Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Legendary Leaders Podcast, where we are here to help change the lives and minds of leaders and those aspiring leaders. And today, oh my gosh, I have the pleasure of having a phenomenal guest, just a thought leader, a consultant in leadership. When I tell you a guru, I've had the pleasure of just talking with him for a few minutes while we were backstage, and he's phenomenal. And I know that you're in for an awesome conversation. He's in the Netherlands, y'all. Oh my goodness. So it's international, it's global. And so that's going to be so exciting just to see it from a different perspective in a different part of the world. So, welcome to the stage, Jeroen. I'm just happy to have you here. So, introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you. So after this this introduction you did, I could probably only disappoint people. So let me do my best. Yes, I'm Jeroen Kraaijenbrink. This is the question I always get. How do you pronounce your name? So here it is, Jeroen Kraaijenbrink. So I'm a strategy expert, and so on one hand I do one thing, which is strategy and leadership. On the other hand, I do that in many different roles. My first career was in academia, so I went to the university, did my PhD, I became an assistant professor and associate professor, and that was a time when I thought I want to have a more direct impact on the real world, real organizations, real people. So I became an independent consultant, helping my own clients, which is something I still do. I also mentor individual people. Training, I do still train a lot of people. I've worked a lot with in executive MBA programs, especially here in the Netherlands. And now, since half a year, also have our own program here with Strategy Inc., where we train strategy consultants or aspiring strategy consultants to learn how to make a difference to their clients.
Mm,
Yeah, and as I said, I've been active. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. Probably an influencer for some reason now. Looking at the followership, and I have a couple of books on strategy as well. So that's
mm.
basically me in a nutshell.
That is a lot. Oh my goodness. And yes, you are a top voice on LinkedIn. And like you said, you're an influencer for leadership. So what was it about leadership that you said, I have to make a difference? Was it something that you saw in leaders that led you, or
Mhm.
was it a gap you wanted to fill? What was it that said it's leadership for me? And that's where I'm going to use my voice.
Yeah, and for me, it's not just leadership, or not leadership in the broadest sense of the word, but strategic leadership. So it's really the
Okay.
intersection of strategy and leadership.
Okay.
And what is driving me there is, I think, two things. One is, I think the main driver is to make a difference there, and the reason is twofold. One is based on my career, especially starting in research and teaching. I know there are so many great tools, so we basically know how we can do better. We know how we can strategize and implement and lead. There's a lot of research on that. On the other hand, you see in practice a lot of companies and leaders struggling. They have difficulty in doing this effectively. And
Yeah.
so on the one hand, we have a big problem. On the other hand, we do have the solutions.
Okay.
And that has been my driver. Like, okay, we have to share all this important
Mhm.
information, the methods, the tools that we have, and make sure that people across the globe uh, become better at this interesting, relevant, and very challenging topic of strategic leadership.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. That is so powerful because right now I'm in my doctorate program for strategic leadership. And like you said, there's so much research and there's so much information out there. So have you done anything in the United States, right? And if you have, do you see a difference in where you are now in the Netherlands versus the United States? Is there a difference in strategic leadership in both places?
Um, Short answer, no. So that's the
Okay.
very short. So I have done I've done work in the US, but also worked with actually people from across the globe. So
Okay.
especially in our current program, we have like 17 nationalities, I think,
Wow.
where time zone is the only challenge.
Okay.
And
Mm.
I've worked also with different cultures, and my conclusion is actually that the differences are much less important than the similarities. So the
Oh.
way I work is quite similar, whether it's in the US or in Asia or in the Netherlands, in
Mm.
Germany. I think it's quite similar, and I think the commonality is we're all people, we're all human beings,
Mm.
and we have our own we have our brain, our emotions, our feelings, and everything that makes us human, which
Mm.
I don't think is a big difference if I just we look at the two of us. Of course, we
Okay.
look very different, but we're both human beings, and I think we have
Mm.
the same needs, the same type of aspirations, the same struggles. So no, I don't see a lot of differences in the way
Okay.
I work with my clients.
Nice. Oh my goodness. So what do you feel is the biggest gap to having that knowledge and understanding that strategy? When you work with your clients, when you work with leaders, what is
Mhm.
the biggest gap that you see for them?
I would rather think the biggest problem is not a gap, but an obstacle, and the obstacle
Okay.
is the traditional almost
Mm.
dogmatic way of thinking about strategy and leadership, and especially strategy. Because if
Okay.
we look in the textbooks that are still used in MBA programs, and frankly that I have used also in my teaching when I started as an
Okay.
assistant professor, there is this idea that strategy is a linear analytical process which has a lot to do with planning and analysis and then data, which is kind of misleading because I think the main point is not analysis, is not planning, but is figuring out together like how do we create unique value as a company, and how do we help people uh, understand what it means for them, and how do we guide them in the process of implementing that. So I think the biggest obstacle is this standard way of thinking about strategy where we need a mission, a vision, core values, and strategic plan with objectives and all of that. It's not
Okay.
wrong, but it's incomplete, and I think that's the main issue.
Really? So what would it take to complete that plan? I know you said values. Is values the biggest component to an organization or a leader completing that plan of being strategic?
Yes and no. I think values is probably the most fundamental part.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be driving leaders, it should be driving culture, it should be driving strategy, organization, and so on, because that expresses why are we doing the things we do, what do we care about, what do we
Mm.
really find important.
Okay.
So that's the yes. On the no
Okay.
side, if
I like
we
it.
focus our efforts and our activities around strategy generation and formulation really on values alone, we don't really make a lot of progress. And I think that's where value creation, which
Mm.
is much more what are the company's products, services, how are these unique, how do they create value for customers, how are they
Okay.
better and different than from the competition. That for me is much more the core of what organizations should focus on strategically and what leaders, especially higher up in the organization, but also at other levels, should be focusing on more on a day-to-day basis. So yes, values are the foundation,
Mhm.
but let's say on the pragmatic level, the a company's value proposition, so the offerings, the services, the products, are at least as important and maybe even more important because
Okay.
that defines why the
Mm.
company should be there in the first place. Because if,
Okay.
as a company, you don't offer valuable products or services, then
Mm.
why should you be there?
What you
You can
do
spend your time better working for another company and doing other things, making other clients happier than you currently do.
Ooh, that is so powerful. I like the value proposition, right? Why are you here? So then how does that translate to people? Once an organization or a leader knows why they're there, how do they filter that down to their team to so the team understands the strategy, so
Mhm.
the team becomes strategic and valuable?
Mhm. I think probably two ways. One is involve them from the beginning. So
Mhm.
avoid the whole idea of trickling down or the top-down hierarchy, but make sure they are part of this from the beginning. And there
Okay.
are there are ways to involve entire companies or at least people at different levels in a company in a very
Mm,
participative approach to strategy.
mm.
So that's more a process answer. Involve them. The
Okay. Mm,
other part is really help them translate what the overarching strategy, values, goals, what
mm.
they mean for them. I think this is
Okay.
also what I see go wrong quite often is that
Mm,
we've developed or companies have developed some overarching goals, overarching strategy, and then it is assumed that if people understand this, if they can reproduce or kind of semantically understand what it means, that they can also execute it. But the problem is we often have to translate the strategy to our own context. What does it mean for our business unit? What does it mean for our team? What does it mean for me personally, for my job? And
okay.
making that translation is something that leaders, and when I say leaders, I mean leaders at every level. And whether you call them
Okay.
managers or leaders, I don't mind. Leaders at every level, their role is helping, helping make that translation. I think that's one of the core roles from a strategy perspective that leaders have.
Mm. Nice. Oh my goodness. That is so powerful. And I like what you're saying, Jeroen, that everyone at every level is a leader, right? Whether you're at the top or whether you're in the middle, whether you're at the bottom. And
Mhm.
I was thinking about a post that you had of how do you know that the strategy is really a strategy, right? Or
Mhm.
how do you know that it's just something someone just thought of and like, okay, let's go for it. How do you know it's really a strategy?
Yeah, there's of course several checks you can do. I think
Okay.
one of the problems is people call something easily strategic just to make it sound more important. I think so. First, the first check we have to do like is what is meant really also meant to be a strategy, or is it just, for instance, strategic marketing, strategic HR, strategic IT, and so on? Is that really strategy? Probably not. It
Okay.
is maybe a different way of looking at those functions.
Mm,
So, but once we know that and have selected strategies that actually should be strategies, I think a very important check is does it explain how this company creates and captures value? So again, it's the value creation part, because my definition of strategy is what's an organization's unique way of sustainable value creation.
okay.
So how do
Oh,
they create value through their products for a specific set of customers in a unique way and in a sustainable way that they can sustain over time?
oh,
And,
wow.
and that should be clear from, I think, from a company strategy. And what I
Mm,
see often is that what is called a strategy is more a collection of objectives or
okay.
aspirations or wishes or hopes,
Oh, wow.
um, that may make sense in and of themselves. But the point is, strategy is kind of this logic, the business logic of how do you put all of these things together and how do they reflect together how you create and capture value as an organization. So if
Ooh.
that's not included, I would not qualify it as a strategy.
Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot of information and just good quality thought processes, right? And so
Mhm.
then if you break that down, right, and you look at the strategy and they implement the strategy, I remember you said the sustainable part. A lot
Mhm.
of organizations, Jerome, they turn around, right? They implement these objectives or strategies, and they're like in the midst of it, and they're getting pushback and they
Mhm.
turn around from it, right? They go the opposite direction. How do you get them to stay the course? Because obviously, if they have the right strategy, we can make a difference, right? We can make a
Mhm.
difference with leaders, and leaders can make a difference in organizations. Jeroen, how do they stay the course and not turn around?
Yeah. Of course, the first question is whether they should stay on course, and this is
Okay.
one of the fundamental challenges in strategy as well. It's like, should I stay or should I go? Should I
Mm,
stick with my strategy? So we
mm,
have thought up our strategy like for the next couple of years,
okay.
1, 2, 3, 5 years, and
Okay.
every day, I think the basic question is, can we sustain that strategy or should we pivot? And
Mm, okay.
think one mantra I recommend for leaders in general and organizations as well is monitor actively, change reluctantly. So make sure
Mm,
you are very much aware of all the changes internally and externally.
okay.
But once you know the changes that are happening, try to stay on course and ask yourself,
Okay.
should I change something or can I still move on in the same direction?
Mm,
Because I know there's a lot of talk about agile strategy, adaptive strategy, whatever the word used, and part of that is useful.
okay.
Also, in my own writings, I talk about short cycle strategy, for instance.
Mm,
If we pivot all the time, if we change all the time, if we make our strategy fully adaptive,
okay.
then we are kind of back at square one because the whole point of strategy was to give us a source of stability in a changing environment because that's where
Okay.
strategy comes from is that when if you look at the history of strategy in business, it is in the time especially in the 70s where people were worried a lot about the turbulence in the environment, the uncertainty, the complexity, the dynamics, quite the same as now actually 50 years later.
Oh.
And
Mm,
strategy was supposed to be the answer. Then they said, like, strategic planning doesn't really work because we cannot really predict what's going to happen. But we
okay.
need strategy, we need strategic management in order to at least have some stability, at least some common frame of reference, so that we're not fully getting into just ad hoc, day to day responsive
Okay.
behavior. So that it's a fine line between like where do you stay on course and where do you correct your course.
Mm,
One final addition to that point is changing a strategy doesn't mean completely throwing it away. A strategy has many elements, and
mm,
in my books, in my teaching, in my work, I use a model called the strategy sketch containing the 10 core elements, and each of these 10 elements has its own dynamics. So if and you have to think about value proposition, customers, resources, risks, values and goals, organizational climate. They all have their own pace, their own dynamics. If one of them changes, for instance, in the market something changes, main competitor disappears, or there's a new competitor, that affects all the other elements, but it does not immediately make all the other elements irrelevant. So
okay.
it's very often more an incremental change where you change one part of your strategy, but
Okay.
the structure of your organization, the culture stays the same, your revenue model, the cost stays the same, the partnerships that you have with your suppliers and others stay the same, but you are changing your product in a certain
Okay.
direction.
Oh wow. Oh, that is so good. Oh my goodness. I think that's powerful because you said do it incrementally, right? And don't do it in large pieces and have to shift everything, right? Like there's a book called Turn This Ship Around because it's small pieces, small elements to it. And I'm big on agile leadership. And I think you touched on that because I studied that and I've helped organizations implement the agile way of leading and working, especially in technology. And when you're looking at it from an agile perspective, right? So a lot of companies are hesitant, Jeroen, and a lot of
Mhm.
companies have started with agile and then they've turned around. Do you think, because of course that's like the new buzzword now, right? The
Mhm.
new buzz of leadership. It used to be the big one was transformational, now it's agile. Do you
Mhm.
think that the agile leadership style is sustainable and the most preferred method for a leader to implement?
I don't know. I think generalizing like what is most preferred it is very hard because in some
Okay.
situations it is and others it's not.
Mm,
Um, the main risk I see, but that's basically with any type of leadership that becomes a hype. So transformational leadership is also has also its risks. Servant
mm,
leadership has also its risks, and I've written about this as well. Like if you're
mm,
just a servant, sometimes you need to be a very strong leader ahead of the troops, and sometimes
okay.
even dictating people what to do if circumstances require you to do so. The
Mm,
same for agile leadership. I think um, there's definitely pros, but there's cons as well. Like as a leader, if you are fully agile, and in this sense, agile meaning kind of fluctuating in flux, if you change too much,
mm,
people lack kind of the stability that a leader also has to give. So it's very much the
Mm,
same as with strategy. Strategy needs to be up to date, accurate, dynamic, but it also needs to give you a sense of stability, reliability, confidence. And I think for the
okay.
leader, it's very much the same. And so
Mm,
I know that if we really have to answer the question, we have to dive into what we mean with agile leadership, because I
okay.
know those terms are often used in very different ways by many different people, meaning sometimes even the opposite almost.
Mm. That is so powerful. And you brought up a good point. What has to be done? I think it's best to look at situational leadership, right? Based on
Mhm.
the situation. And I remember when I was in the army, that happened a lot. And a lot of people that weren't in the military, they get kind of put off by some of the styles and methods of those in the
Mhm.
military, and they think it's just yelling and fussing and cussing. Like, no, that's not it. It's based on the situation, right? If you're in war, you lead differently than when you're at
I hope
peacetime.
so. Yes.
So I remember several times we were on the battlefield going on missions, and just the execution of it is completely different, versus when we're just back at home and enjoying ourselves. So the leadership style has to change. And you bring up a good point, because I think people get stuck, especially if you're in an agile environment, knowing when to shift your leadership style,
Yeah.
knowing when to shift the way you operate and interact with people. So, how can leaders be best aware of when the shift needs to take place? How do they cultivate that awareness?
Uh, I don't know. That's an honest answer, isn't it?
Okay, I
Yeah.
like that. I like that answer, though. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first thing is self-awareness,
Okay.
being understanding yourself and your limitations, and be frank and be honest to yourself, and know your strength, know what you can do, know what you cannot do, so what your weaknesses are. And
Okay.
also, I think even though situational leadership is, I think, sort of ideal, every leader has its own preference
Okay.
and or tendency to lead in one way or the other. So
Okay.
you have leaders that are more in front of the troops, more, let's say, more top down. You have leaders that prefer more to be behind or next to their people and more
Okay.
invisible. I think that has very much to do with their character, and part of that we cannot really change. And I think we shouldn't try to change, because I think you're a best leader if you're authentic, if you are leading in a way that fits who you are as a person, what you can do, what your skills are.
Mm,
So recognizing and being aware of when to use what type of leadership, I think, starts very much with know thyself, know yourself.
ooh, know
And
yourself.
also to bring back also the parallel to strategy, because that's exactly the same there. I think there's a lot in the traditional approach. We look outside, we look what's going on in the market, in the world around us, we look at trends, we make all kind of predictions, analysis, and so on. I almost always start the other way around. Look inside. Who are we as an organization? What are we
Mm,
good at? What are the competences? What's unique about us? What are our values? What's our culture? Because that's the thing, that's what you have in place. And
okay.
that's what you can use in many different ways. So then using that unique skill, that unique competence, that unique situation, I think is the best thing to do for organizations when we talk about strategy. And it's also, I think, the best thing to do for leaders. Of
Mm,
course, be very sensitive to the context, but before you can do that, you really need to understand who you are and what your limitations are, and then probably develop some additional skills if you know your weaknesses. Either find people that have those weaknesses as strength and help them support you, or try to develop those weaknesses if they really get into the way of effective leadership.
ooh, I love that. I love that. For I don't know, that was really good. Just so you know, that was powerful. And you said know thyself, right? And I think that's where emotional intelligence becomes a part of the strategy for a leader, right? And part of the emotional intelligence is the self-awareness, right? and just the relationship management and just that social interaction
Mhm.
that makes a leader great. And you know what, Jeroen, I think that's probably one of the key aspects to great strategic leadership is knowing yourself, right? Knowing what you're good at and finding those people that you can surround yourself with to create that ecosystem to propel your greatness, to propel other people's greatness. That
Mhm.
is that is so powerful. Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah,
That
and I think know yourself, but also be yourself. And I think this is
ooh,
something part of the bigger picture. What I do
mm,
is a more human-centered approach to strategy. And I know leadership, of course, has always been quite human-centered, but
okay.
human-centered means also like a whole person approach. Look at yourself as a whole person. You're not just the CEO of a company. You're a father, you're a friend, you're a mother, a sister, and so on. You have different roles. You have emotions. You
Mhm.
don't. And I think the main issue, or an important issue in strategy, leadership, and consulting, is we have kind of narrowed this down to like a left brain activity, the rational, analytical thinking part. While as human beings, we're so much more. We have a right brain half where we have our more creative, holistic thinking. We have emotions, we have gut feel, we have a body, so we are all an entire person. And I think as a leader, but also as a consultant, as an employee, bringing that whole self to work I think is where we should be going. This is also why I work very much on what I call soulful strategy, which is also the name of my newsletter, on a
Mm,
whole person, human-centered approach to strategy and consulting. Because for some reason, over the decades, we have
mm,
turned this so much into a rational, analytic, economic function that and then we see the downsides of that around us, both in companies where employees are often unhappy with how they're treated or how they work. Or what we see it also with the kind of companies we have and the effect they have on our environment socially, but also climate-wise and so on. I
mm.
think if we have a much more human-centered or human-centric approach to strategy, to organizations, to leadership, I think a lot of that can improve. And
Okay.
so that's yeah one of the things I'm currently focusing on very much.
Really? Oh, bring your whole self. Oh my God. Like that is so powerful. And I'm glad you stated that because a lot of times, and it's unfortunate, right? That people have been conditioned to not bring their whole self to work. So you get a mirror image or a facade of a
Mm.
person. And I think that's part of the way we have to shift things, right? The way we have to transition to a more holistic approach. And I think you're right. I think it will be better for organizations to have the whole self and that whole person in their organization because there's some great people out there, right? Some
Mm.
phenomenal people. Oh my goodness. So Jaron, we're rounding out our time together. And this, I could talk to you all day. I could tell you're a professor. I would have loved to be in your class, you know. So
Mm.
you have to come back and talk to me about how
Let's not do that to our listeners.
you said
For
say
now,
it again.
let's keep it short and not require our listeners to listen another half hour.
I okay, we'll keep the class short today, but
Yeah.
oh my God, I love it. So if you have one suggestion, one nugget or piece of information that you will want leaders to put in their toolkit or put in their playbook early, what would that one thing be? You said, hold on to this, leaders, as you go on your journey. This is what you hold on to. What would that be?
Mhm. Trust your gut.
Oh, just that simple, huh?
Yeah, and I think this is something also reflecting on myself, something I have
Mhm.
not done enough, let's say, in the past.
Okay.
Because as a researcher, as a lecturer, as a consultant, I've been trained to think rationally and make
Okay.
calculated decisions and think about things. So it's in our culture, like think first, then act. So use your head, use your brain, all of that. And I think the risk what we have done with it is kind of underestimate the power of our intuition, and also even ignore intuition. And what I've experienced myself is making decisions based on gut feel rather than on what you think is the optimal decision has turned out to be a much more effective and also much more fun way of living and working. So I
Mm,
think that's something we can learn to rely more on, and whether that's leaders or employees or consultants or anyone, I think
okay.
rely much more on that that intuitive part of that we all have.
Oh, wow. Trust your gut and trust your instinct. And you know what, Jeroen, we have to get back to that. And it's hard because we suppressed it for so long. And knowing that that is okay and it's the right way to go is so important. That's the self awareness. That's that heart work, internal work. I love it. I love it. I love it. Jeroen, I've had such a great time talking with you. You have been phenomenal. And I know that our audience will be blessed because of you and just your leadership. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for making the strides in leadership and in the world in general. So thank you so much for being here and a part of the conversation today. And we'll have to have you back for another time. So we won't make them listen forever. So we'll have to have them back another time.
So yeah, you're welcome, and thank you very much for having me and for this very positive vibe you're bringing into the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Oh, my goodness. Well, audience, our time is up. I want to thank you for just being here today. Thank you for tuning in to Legendary Leadership. And like I always say, if you don't know what to do, if you can't do anything else, don't be ordinary, be legendary. When you're searching for which direction to go and how you should proceed, just know that you are legendary. So, whatever you do, don't be ordinary, be legendary. Thank you for tuning in, audience. Have a great day. And until next time, friends, be wonderful. Bye for now.